Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Internationalie podcast. Before we start, let me talk a little bit about the podcast. So, the Internationalie podcast is going to be a space where different international students, prospective ones, as well as current international students, could get a glimpse into the life of international students in the US or abroad. This week, I am joined by my very, very dear friend, Beatty. Welcome to the show, Beatty.
Thank you so much for having me, Ruth.
Of course. So before we delve into our conversation, let me talk a little bit about you. So Beatty is from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and she's a graduate of Wesleyan University with majors in neuroscience and biology and a minor in East Asian studies. Outside of science, she studied French and Korean and participated in a summer exchange program at Seoul National University. After college, she worked as a research assistant at Yale University for 2 years before moving to Atlanta to start her neuroscience PhD journey at Emory University. Outside of research, she likes to participate in group fitness classes, go for a walk in nature, or try out new restaurants around the city. Is there anything else you would like to add to your bio?
I think that's a very thorough description.
All right. So, as the title of this episode is dealing with mental well-being, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word mental well-being?
The first thing that comes to my mind as a grad student when I think about mental well-being is really work-life balance, I think. And I think most college students, this can apply to you as well. Even if you're not working, it's just this balance of having a personal life and life in school or at work. So that's really the first thing that comes to my mind is my life, balanced? Am I having a good social life as well as thriving in my academic life?
Yeah. Even for me, when I hear the word mental well-being, um, I immediately think of mental health and all of the things associated with keeping yourself well and good enough to perform well at school, but also, as you said, balancing your social life. And it also makes me think of the word self-care, which
Yes.
when when I was in college, that was so overused to the point
Mm-hmm.
where I was so irritated by it. Do you relate with that or agree
Yes,
with
I
that?
relate. Honestly, that was one of the first things I thought of originally when I thought about mental well-being, because as you said, that word is thrown around a lot, and I think it takes really thinking about it in terms of your own perspectives to see what that means to you. Because self-care, I mean, there's different ways of practicing self-care, but I think what people generally talk about self-care, it's could be just doing facial masks or something very generic, but that doesn't necessarily apply to everyone, because
Yeah.
really self-care sometimes can just be showing up for yourself. Showing up to class can be considered self-care sometimes. So it really depends on where you are mentally, and that can really vary between people. And so yeah, I don't like the idea that self-care is just this generic thing, and everybody has to have a certain steps in their self-care routine. I think it's really dependent on what you can afford, where you are, and yeah. So
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
relate to that.
For sure, for sure. And I think as an international student, that term might be maybe it might be a bit unfamiliar for you because I don't know,
Yes.
people have different experiences, but for me personally, I remember when I was in college, people kept talking about self-care and I was like, what are they talking about? And it took me a really long time to understand what they meant and even really understand the value um of my mental health and trying to prioritize that as a student. So, first off, why do you think it is important for us to even discuss this topic for international students? But
Mm-hmm.
also, secondly, why do you think it's important for us to make sure that we're well mentally
Oh
as
my god.
students?
Super important. I mean, okay, for the first question, why this topic is important for not just an international student, but really any college student, is that college is, a big time of change. There's a lot of transitions associated with starting college. Even if you're a domestic student, I think depending on where you're coming from, there's always some kind of transition. And change can be a stress factor. And so to be an international student is like 10 times that, right? Like you're leaving home, you're leaving your comfort zone. You're excited, but you're also really don't know what to expect. There's just so many factors that add to, that stress factor. And so I think it's really important that we discuss it, on this podcast for, prospective international students, because there's so many changes associated with leaving your country for education. And I feel like the first thing that we think about when we study abroad is just really our academic goals. But then we have to acknowledge that we're also living life, day-to-day life in this new country, new environment. And so that can add a lot of, pressure. And so it's really important to be aware of our mental well-being and not just to think about like academic milestones, but also really where are we mentally? Are we, doing our best? Are we thriving? So yeah, I think that's why it's important.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, because even for me, I think it's very relevant, especially for not only prospective students, but also for current students to, think about their mental health and their mental well-being while they're students, because it's the point where, everything you face is new, it's different, and it's a challenge every day to survive as a college student. And if you add being an international student on top of that, it's like a whole different ball game. And so I think it's very important for us to discuss this topic, because I also think that, as much as we hear the word self-care a lot, we don't really, sit down and discuss mental well-being. Like, what does it really mean, to be well mentally? So I wanted to ask you a bit, like, what was the first moment, or like the first experience that you had that made you think about your own mental health, or it could be an experience of your friends, or I just wanted to, like, what was the first instance that made you think about, how important it was for you?
Yeah. I think what you said about seeing how my friends are doing, I think that was the first sign for me. It didn't hit me in my own self until very later on how important this was, but I could see people around me, my friends, my classmates, and there were some people that were really struggling mentally, and it didn't take me too long to realize that, wow, this is something to look out for in myself. And people were generally very open to talk about mental health. People would say, I'm feeling depressed, maybe not something that we hear, normally in Ethiopia. Like, this is not something. Or people are like, they're open to discuss about like maybe a diagnosis they got in like depression or anxiety or any other mental health disease. And so that's when I realized, okay, this thing is not just because in Ethiopia we think about mental health as this, just cloudy, not real. But I realized very soon that, mental health is as important as physical health, because I saw some people not showing up to class. And when I would ask, they would tell me that they're not mentally, in the state of showing up. And so it's really observing the people around me. And then I started seeing it in myself too, like especially later on when I was starting to apply for jobs and internships, how each step has its own like added stress factor. And that's when sometimes I would see it in myself too, that maybe I'm not as excited to be there. Maybe I'm just really not being myself around people. And so those are really the first few times when I realized, okay, this is something to, really think about on the daily. It's not just a myth, it's as important as physical health. So
yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story, because I think it's very important for us to even recognize when we realize that, dealing with mental health is not easy. And for me personally, when I think about my college journey, I talk about this a lot on this podcast, but my first year was like very it's one of the years that I always go back to when I try to think of like my college experience, because a lot of things happened. And especially the spring semester for me, it was, and I still can't really understand what was going on, because fall semester I was like, all good, it's so exciting, I have all these new friends, international students, I was like living the life, enjoying every moment. And then I come back for spring semester, and then things change. And I first noticed it when like I didn't want to go to class, and I wasn't seeing the sun as much. And, because Northampton, it's very, it's very cold and around the winter months. And I didn't realize that the environment was having an effect on my mental health until much later on, where I had a discussion with friends and my dean and, stuff like that. And I think a lot of the things that I struggled with came from maybe lack of information, because I wasn't aware that I was I was struggling with my mental health at that point until I had passed it, and yeah, and I didn't want to go to class. I remember, eating in my room and not going to class. And it was so bad to the point where I got sick and I couldn't take my finals that last semester. And I had to come back home. And, coming back home was very necessary. And I think asking for help was what helped me at that point, because I delayed that so long to the point where my grades suffered. But then I still was able to come back and finish school. But it was until later on that I even knew of, trying to look back at what actually happened. I even, learned about the term seasonal depression. I didn't even know that was a thing. And, as you said, growing up in Ethiopia, the sun is something that we take for granted. It's there every day.
Oh, tell me about it.
And not seeing it every day was having an impact on my health. And I literally could not get out of bed. And so those were the first moments where I had to deal with my mental health. And thank God, I passed through that, that time and was able to go back to school. And, that experience was very formative for me. And it even made me change my major and the things that I wanted to do in college. And a lot of things, shifted positively for me after that.
Yes.
And I was able to, to recognize the triggers and some of the environmental things that was affecting me. But at the same time, as you said, you also see that or notice that in your friends, right? So at that point, for me, because I was going through it by myself, I felt like I was the only one going through it. Do you relate with that?
Yeah, I relate to that to some extent, especially during, winter breaks or spring breaks when most of the students, go home to be with family, or holidays, really. I think that really nails it down. Holidays when your friends are leaving to spend time with their families, you're stuck in your dorm. And sometimes you even have to negotiate with the school administrators to be able to stay in your dorm, which to me, that sounds really crazy, because we're here, you brought us here, and you're not able to provide us with housing during breaks, and so that adds to the already this state of loneliness that you have, right? When everybody's leaving and you're stuck in your dorm. But yeah, I definitely relate to that, for sure.
Yeah. It's very funny that you brought that up, because I remember so for me, I was very lucky because my parents were also in the US, so I used to go there for Christmas break, but I wasn't able to go for Thanksgiving or spring break, which are really, really short amount of days, maybe a couple of days. And so I remember the campus being just international students, and you could also you could immediately sympathize with each other. It's oh my God, we're by ourselves here on this campus and there's nobody here. And I mean, some schools, they have funds for international students to stay on campus, but other schools might not be as accommodating to the needs of international students. So I think it's very important to maybe recognize that there are moments when you are a college student as an international student that you're
more vulnerable.
Yeah. Right. Yeah
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you brought up the point about other international students being around and knowing that you're not alone in that. So really just finding a community. I think that's one of the things that I really want to talk about in this podcast, is how important community is when it comes to, because self-care, it's not just something that you do by yourself. It really takes a village. It really takes sometimes, your friends recognizing that you're not doing as well as you used to. And so I think it's really important that you are surrounding yourself with people you can relate with. Maybe your class is predominantly, domestic students, but really just make sure to at least be friends with a few international students, so that when the time comes and you guys are the only people around, you just really take care of each other.
Yeah.
And another important thing is really just vulnerability and being able to share that you're not necessarily feeling well. I think that's something I
Right.
struggled with initially, just coming from a cultural perspective, like, you know, in Ethiopia, you don't just tell people, oh, like I'm feeling lonely or I'm feeling depressed. Like that's really looked down upon, right? We
Right.
don't share a lot of our feelings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and people just see on the outside that you're doing well, you're in
Right.
America, you're, you know, getting this top education, obviously, which are
Mm-hmm.
all really great accomplishments, but
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of people check in with you to see how you are really mentally.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important that we just acknowledge that, you know, like vulnerability is important. And when you
Mm-hmm.
open up, other people open up, and you'll realize that you're not the only person dealing with that.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very important realization for me, where, you know, I would feel a certain way and I would think no one can relate. But that's because
Right.
I didn't share, because I just kept it to myself. And so
Mm-hmm.
even small things, as, you know, as little as like feeling exhaustion or just burnout, you know, just tell your friends, tell the people around you, this is how you're feeling, and
Mm-hmm.
try to come up with solutions or ways that you could take care of yourself. Maybe, you know, just if you're living in an apartment with a few other friends, maybe see
Right.
how you can help each other out in terms
Mm-hmm.
of like tasks that you can do around the house, like splitting responsibilities, maybe setting
Mm-hmm.
some time aside to watch a movie or do something fun together. It
Right.
takes a lot of intentionality. That's what I learned.
Yeah.
Self-care takes a lot of intentionality, and you have to be okay setting some time aside from your
Mm-hmm.
tasks to just care for yourself. And so
Right.
usually when I was in college, I would take Friday nights to just really take care of myself. That was my,
Mm-hmm.
you know, dedicated time. Of course, you have to take care of yourself each and every day, but sometimes you just have to dedicate a time to like journal, you know, do something for
Mm-hmm.
yourself.
Right.
So intentionality is very key.
Wow. Wow, amazing. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Beatty. I think there are like three major things that I took away from that. Like the first one is community, second one is vulnerability, and the third one is intentionality. And I want to comment on all three of them. So the first one, community, I think it's I for me personally, like when I look back at my college career, it's not the school that I remember, it's not the grades that I got that I remember, or maybe, you know, some of the things that I thought I would remember. It's the people. And
Yes.
you know, the people you meet in college are, you know, for me personally, I mean, I can't speak for someone else, but I know that a lot of people share this feeling. You know, the people that you meet in college are there for you. You know, they're not only your friends, but they turn out to be your family, because your family is not there with you as a student, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're an international student, you have this, you know, sort of special bond with each other, because you're kind of going through the same similar struggles. And even for me personally, I remember during that time where I was not feeling good and not going to class, I remember I had this friend who used to come and check up on me like every day, and you know, bring me, you know, food, make my bed, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
it's these kinds of friends, and remind me to register for classes, and like, you know, make sure I don't miss, you know, very important deadlines. And she was like, I remember this person very well, because we're still close friends. And um I remember feeling like, oh, someone actually cares about, you know, how I'm doing and how well I am. You know, even, you know, I know my family cares about me, but they're not there to tell me that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the
Yes.
person who's physically there with me is this friend that I have. And I really, really cannot, you know, underestimate the power of connection, the power of people, and the power of community. Do you relate with that?
Oh my God, absolutely. I would not be here without, you know, the international student community, the interfaith community, the Christian community. Like there's
Yeah.
so many ways to find community, and you know, you just have to find that element that helps you relate with other people. And
Mhm.
you don't have to relate on all aspects. For instance, you know, I mentioned the Christian community. Not everyone in that community is an international student, but at least you have this, you know, similar views or religious
Mhm.
views. Um,
Mhm.
and so just finding a subset of people that share
Mhm.
your either your views, your experiences,
Mhm.
something that really, you know, is common to you all. It's so important to identify that early on. Just freshman year, you know,
Yep.
be okay with showing up to events. That's kind of how you meet people.
Yep.
um, yeah, so community is definitely key, and I would not have made it without the people around me. Absolutely.
Exactly. And I relate with that 100% and even more. And I think finding your people could be very different for everybody, because what you value might be different from what I value, but you're going to find someone who's going to vibe with you, or you're going to find at least one person who's going to be your friend. So that's going to help you, when you're struggling with your mental health, or when you're dealing with a lot of challenges. Having someone to talk to is very important, which brings me to my next point, which is vulnerability, which you mentioned. As you said, like, it's very hard for us to you know um it's very hard for us to be open and vulnerable with other people. And I think that comes from the cultural background that we have, or um, or even it might be just the way that we are,
Personalities,
yeah, personality wise. But I really, really understand the importance of asking for help and talking about what you're dealing with and being open about what you're experiencing, because unless you tell people what you're going through, you're not going to find a solution, and nobody else is going to read your mind, right? Because you have no idea what other people are going through. Because on the outside, you feel you seem like everything is fine, you got everything under control. You might even be smiling and laughing all the time, but underneath you might be really struggling. And being open with people and really sharing that might be very difficult, but I think it's very, very important to do that. So thank you for raising that. The third one was intentionality, and I think that's very important as well. Like, being intentional about the time that you spend for yourself, doing the things that you love, doing the things that give you joy, and things that you enjoy. And I think that's very, very important. And I think I learned to do that after my first year, of sophomore year, junior year. And I got really good at it my senior year, and then by that time I had to graduate. So but why do you think it's very important for us to be intentional about the time that we spend for ourselves?
That's a good question. I think it's just so easy to be lost in your tasks, in your daily tasks, where some people don't even set time aside to eat. I'm not one of those people. I love food.
Yes.
And I cannot go without having my meals. But you can see it in people when they get super overwhelmed and so into the tasks that they have to do that they forget a necessity, which is eating and sustaining yourself. And so I think that's really why intentionality is important, because there's a lot of pressure around you, people telling you need to be here, meetings to attend, just so many things going on around you. Like, college is such like an exciting time, but there's so many things to do, like vibrant community life, academic life. Like, it's just so easy to be lost in that you don't really ask yourself and like look within how you're doing and how you're feeling. And so intentional time set aside, such as maybe journaling each night, or even if it's not every day, really, like Friday nights I still get like calendar invites saying make sure you blog to this day. And so it's important because it's just so easy to be lost in everything going on around you that you just need to have this discipline of setting time aside for yourself. And to do something that you enjoy, that is not academics.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for bringing that up, because a lot of times I also notice this in other people, and I also notice this in myself. We tend to prioritize the things that are external, right? So our grades, our so-called accomplishments, or like the things that we think we're supposed to do, rather than what our body is telling us, or like what our mind is telling us to do for ourselves. And I think we've been so accustomed to the fact that we have suppressed that feeling, that is like sometimes the burnout comes when we don't listen to ourselves for a long time, and there we reach a point where things we can't no longer control ourselves. And so sometimes when you get sick, even that's when you realize, oh my god, I haven't been taking care of myself or my body. I haven't been eating well, I haven't been sleeping well, I need to take care of myself. And for me, it's when I get sick, or like when I'm not feeling really well, that I realize that I have been neglecting myself. And so I try to actively mediate that, or like try to do the things that I really enjoy. And some of the things, as you mentioned, is journaling, and I love to journal. And around the junior year of my college career, I remember I started also working out. I talked about this with my friend Hilda. We started working out, and that became, my it really grounded me, and it became how I started my day. And I remember I noticed it in myself where if I had finals or I was really, really stressed, I had to work out every day, or else I would not have been able to deal with that amount of stress that I was going through. And so I feel it, and that worked for me. And I know it doesn't work for other people, or, it's just, and, you have to try to find the thing that really works for you. And you're not going to find that unless you try things, right? So I think it's also very important to be open-minded about some of the new opportunities that come your way, some of the new hobbies that you might partake in as a college student. And so I wanted to ask you, like, what were some of the new things that you did as an international student that you didn't do before, that really helped you keep the balance of your mental health?
Yeah. I think you mentioned this in my description initially, but something that I found to be really relaxing is also related to exercise, but like these group fitness classes where,
Mm-hmm.
Zumba could be, yoga could be really like any group fitness classes where you're not necessarily the only one there. You have an instructor who obviously is, an expert in that, and you have other people practicing it with you, which, I never went to any kind of group exercise classes when I was in Ethiopia. So
Yeah.
it was definitely a nice way to, of course, meet people when the exercise is done, but just just a nice place to be. A lot of positivity, because a lot of these instructors, especially when it comes to yoga, there's so many positive things that they share during the session, and so that was something that I really enjoyed. Outside of that, I think I cooked a lot when I was in Ethiopia, but it wasn't a self-care. It was more of, just helping out at home. But
Yeah.
in college, because there is cafeteria food, for the first 2 years or so, I barely cooked. I would just
Yeah.
eat cafeteria food. Definitely a victim of the freshman 15.
Oh my God, same. Same.
Um,
Yeah.
and I remember you, like, giving me some tips initially when I moved here. You were like, Betty, like, make sure you look out, like, what you eat.
Yeah.
And, looking back now, like, I really understand why you told me that. But so cooking really became a form of therapy, which is so interesting, because I never would have thought that something like cooking would be a way of relaxing. But sometimes it can be a hobby, trying out new recipes, because there's no access to injera, so you have to try something new, some new
Yes.
recipes. And I enjoyed just finding some new things to cook, usually with other people, but even if it's by myself, I would just make my plate look really pretty, maybe take some food photography.
Yes.
You just really learn to make the smallest things enjoyable. I think that's really what I found lately, is just, you don't have to have a lot of, you don't have to spend a lot of money, or go to like fancy places. You can really just make the small things enjoyable for yourself. Whatever makes you happy, do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm pretty sure, like, we've all gone, our fair share of the freshman 15. I was also, because even like cafeteria food is not even that great, but that's the only option you have sometimes. And so you can't help it, so that's also some of the things that you have to go through as an international student, which is like very interesting, because a lot of people also struggle with that. But I think after a while you learn how to balance it, or like you try to cook, and you learn new habits, and cooking with friends is always fun. And it could be your self-care routine, although that has also been used very much. But I also wanted to discuss with you, Beatty, the relationship between social media and your mental well-being, because as we're living in this technologically advanced world where everything is so connected, and now a lot of people are using social media, and I'm pretty sure a lot of college students are active users of at least one social media platform. How do you keep yourself mentally sane while still maybe becoming part of that social media, because you want to stay connected with your friends, you want to see what's going on in their lives as well? But how do you keep that balance? I wanted to ask you.
That's a really, really good question. Social media can really, it can go both ways. It can really help, and as you said, connect with people that you haven't seen in a while. I personally, I'm very happy whenever I see pictures of my, like old school friends, like
Yeah.
just doing their own thing, traveling. Like it just really excites me to see that and definitely motivates me. But on the other hand, it can definitely also impact your mental health. So you can, maybe there's fear of missing out,
Yep,
FOMO,
for
right?
sure.
Like, oh, my friends are, traveling to Puerto Rico and I'm here like stuck in my room, there's like,
Yeah.
I think we're really susceptible to comparing ourselves to other people. And we really have to be conscious of like how we view social media. And another thing is also just the time we spend on it. I definitely am, guilty of spending too much time on social media sometimes as a way of
Right.
distraction. And so sometimes just setting, some time, like maybe on your phone, there are these, settings where you can control how much time you spend on social media every day. So it's one way to have like a healthy boundary. But I think the most important thing is just to not compare yourself to how, other people are doing. First of all, social media is a highlight, right? We usually put the things that make us happy or just like really a highlight of our lives. Of course, some people are good about portraying their daily lives, but most of us, I think, we like to share highlights. We like to share our happy moments, which is nice.
Exactly.
But that's something you have to remember, that everybody's mostly sharing their highlights, and that's not, that doesn't mean that they're not struggling in their own ways. And so just to not feel like you're the only person who's maybe not traveling or not doing things. So yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's definitely very relevant. Also, just in times of COVID, like when we were stuck at home, like all we're doing is really going on social media. That's where we're getting our news from. Sometimes, so as an international student, sometimes you're not necessarily looking at your, like, say, Ethiopian news every day. What you get is what you see on social media, and so that can really impact your mental health in a negative way. Because people are not sharing, the good things that are going on in your country. Usually it's when it's really bad. And so seeing that, on and on again, that could really also impact your mental health. So I would say, when it comes to, for instance, like negative news about your country, one thing to do is obviously speak to your family to like get a full picture of what's going on. Another thing, just diversify your sources. So don't just follow like the same narrative or the same kinds of accounts. Try to diversify the kind of accounts or like news sources that you follow. And yeah, I think those are ways to control that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Beatty, because I think it's very relevant for us to be, conscious about the time that we're spending on social media and how it's impacting our mental health. And as you said, like the things that you see on social media, it's either really really good or it's really really bad. It's both extremes and there is no middle ground. So I think you have to take things with a grain of salt. Things that you see on social media is not as glamorous, but as you said, we're always susceptible to things and we kind of fall into that trap. But what I used to do was, whenever I wanted to spend more time studying or things like that, I used to delete my Instagram or the things that I had until I'm done with school, and then I log in and check in with everybody else. So that has worked for me. And I'm sure other people have different ways of dealing with the impact of social media on their mental health, and do the things that really helps you balance your life. So yeah, I think that's
sure. Yeah, I think
go
on? It is great that you sometimes delete your accounts when that really just shows that you acknowledge that sometimes you're spending too much time and you're taking an action to stop yourself from those distractions, because it's definitely good to have boundaries.
For sure yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add in regards to mental well-being? Anything that you think we did not discuss so far?
I think another point that I wanted to bring up is this idea of like productivity, because I think that also feeds into the way that we view ourselves, especially in college. I think you've mentioned this before in your other podcasts, but really in college there's a lot of people just showing off how many things they're doing, and just like
Mm-hmm.
there's this, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like, oh, I'm doing these 10 things, and people are just competing to like show off like how much stuff they're doing, how many clubs they're part of, how many classes they're taking.
Right.
And I really find that super toxic, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, it's so easy to think that you're not doing enough, but
Right.
you know, I think that's really depends on your own mental capacity, because I think we all have different bandwidth of like things that we
Mm-hmm.
can do. And so I just want to share that, you know, to people that are in college right now or considering, to not really lose themselves in this idea of like the more things you do, the better off you are, or like the more successful you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so productivity could be different in different people. So like have your own standards of measurement. Don't just go by this general trend, and be okay with knowing your limits. Sometimes it's okay to take less classes than your peers, maybe, you know, if that's really how you're feeling. If you feel like maybe the classes you're taking this semester are, you know, taking a lot of, you know, your time, it's okay to take less classes and kind of balance that the next semester. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up, I guess, is also like rejection, because those are also very prominent in college.
Yes.
Your first rejection, you know, it's gonna hurt, it's gonna make you doubt yourself. And the thing is, it's not going to stop there. There's, especially if you're staying in academia like me, like if you're going to graduate school, or just really, there's so many ways that you'll be rejected, and to take that like too personally, you know what I mean? Like to be okay knowing that, because we're so used to being admitted, being accepted, like all these good things, and then your first internship or something, you know, you may not get it right away, and I don't know, as an international student, but also like maybe being super competitive or something, you take that personally, like, okay, am I not enough? You know, I'm doing something wrong. But I realized that everybody goes through some rejections, and sometimes rejections can lead to, you know, like other ways for you to explore like newer opportunities. So to not really take rejections as, you know, as a negative thing, but really reevaluate where you are, and to like keep applying to more things. Yeah, so I thought I would bring up rejection as like another thing that's happening, that happens a lot in college, that could impact your.
Right. Thank you so much for bringing that up, BT. You know, the first one was productivity, and I think that's one of the main reasons why we tend to overwork ourselves, because we don't think we're that productive, and we feel the pressure of performing or even outperforming other people. And as you mentioned, when you're surrounding yourself with people who are always trying to who are always trying to show off that they got everything together, and like everything is fine, and things are going well for them, they are, it makes you feel like a certain way, even if you're, really good at, taking care of yourself. People can really impact how you're feeling about, your self-worth, or like things that make you feel like you're doing less, or less than what you're supposed to. So I think it's very important to recognize those things and find a way of maybe dealing with that. Maybe it's, changing your friend group, or, surrounding yourself with people who are very positive, or who are, supportive, or like share things with you, rather than people who just, try to show off and think that, they're better than you. So I think that's also some of the things that is very uncomfortable, but something that you have to learn how to do in college. And I also, went through a phase where, I needed to, step away from this person who was, maybe always complaining, or maybe was always trying to show off that, they were doing everything. So I literally have to intentionally distance myself sometimes, so that I don't get bogged down into that feeling of, oh, okay, maybe I'm not doing well. So I think that's very relatable. So thank you for bringing that up. And the second point that you raised about rejection, I could not agree more, because I'm pretty sure there was this person that I met who was actually very recently, and they told me that they've never been rejected in their lives when they applied for things. And I was like, how is that even possible? And like, they've been working for a long time now, so they got their first job, they got their first school, they applied to everything, like went well for them. And so they applied to this thing and they got rejected, and they were like, but I've never been rejected. And so I started thinking about my own college experience, like applying to internship after internship, and especially as an international student, there are just a few opportunities that are open for you. And, you get used to hearing a lot of no's. And, at some point you kind of, develop this feeling like, oh, maybe things, maybe I'm not worth it, or maybe I'm not getting this because I don't have, maybe I don't deserve it, or like, these are some of the thoughts that you might have. But as you said, there's this quote that I read the other day that said, rejection is redirection, which I really, really liked, because it's like a, deviation from your own path, but it's going to take you into a better place. When one door closes, another opens. So I think it's very important, because rejection can really make us, doubt ourselves, or like think that we're less deserving. And I think it's very important to recognize that that's not the case. But I think it's very valid that you share that experience. So thank you, Vicky.
Yeah. I think another point that kind of relates to rejection is also uncertainty, because you brought up how there are few opportunities for us as international students, and sometimes, that can lead to uncertainty, like especially when it comes to securing a job. There might be a period of time where you don't know where your next path is. We're supposed to just going from year to year, like from first grade to 12th grade, and then going to college. And then after that, you're like, okay, now what? Because it's not so structured anymore. And so uncertainty is also something I noticed in most international students. I mean, everybody experiences it, but it's more stressful for us, obviously, because we don't have that, maybe family that we can go back to. Kind of job. We're also kind of on a time crunch, right? Like we only have a certain number of days or weeks to be able to know what our next step is. And that can be really, anxiety inducing, really, because like you want to give yourself some time and some grace to find your next opportunity, but at the same time there's this like looming deadline and looming time frame. So another factor that really could affect the mental health of international students is not knowing your next step. Do you have any tips for that, on how to going through that period of time?
I remember vividly my senior year how I also started noticing these things like early on, when there are these group of people who are seniors who have already secured their job in September or like October, like fall semester, and they're already like set, they have the fellowship or like the job that they're already doing, and they keep telling you that this is what they're going to do after graduating. I was like, great, that's awesome, congratulations. And then they're like a group of people who are like, oh, I'm applying to this, I'm applying to that, I'm applying to that. And then there's this group of people which I'm part of. It's like, I have no idea what's going on. Like, I don't know what I'm gonna do after graduation. And I remember when I was a senior, every single person you meet, I was like, oh, so what are you gonna do after graduation? Oh, so what are your plans after graduation? And that was the question that was so annoying. And I understand, it comes from a place of curiosity, or like, they care about my future, or like they want to know what I'm gonna be up to, after graduation. I really appreciate that. But it used to really annoy me, and my answer used to be, oh, I don't know, God knows, I really don't know at this point. And then they're like, oh, okay, good luck with whatever you're gonna do. I was like, okay, thank you. And that's how I learned how to answer the questions, because every time someone would ask me that, I used to get this feeling of like, oh my god, I don't know what I'm gonna do, and that scares you. It's like, some people might even ask you, oh, so you don't know what you're gonna do. You should know what you're gonna do. You're gonna be a college graduate, and they're almost like kind of judgmental as to like, you should have your, things figured out by now, what really helped me at that point, as I mentioned, was just saying like, I really don't know what I'm gonna do, and that's it. But I also saw the pressure, from professors, from friends, from family, from literally everybody you interact with. Your senior year could be very, very stressful, because you're trying to navigate your next path. And as an international student, there's like an added burden of like, am I staying in the US? Am I going back home? What am I going to do after graduation? You only have like a certain amount of time to decide, because, your visa might expire, or like you have, your grace period is like 2 months after graduation. That might be over, and, you have to make a decision as soon as possible, and you don't have the option of just staying in the US for however long you want. So I really do understand that struggle, and I've been through that, and it was very hard. It wasn't easy, but things work out the way they're supposed to. So how did you deal with that when people were asking you that?
Yeah, not very well. I think I probably secured my job like a month before graduation, so like pretty
Wow.
late compared to other people.
That's actually early, kind
Is
of.
it though?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. But
Yeah.
as you said, I think definitely like having faith that things will work out the way they're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to. It's not
Mm-hmm.
very. It's easy to say that now that it has passed, and like looking back,
Yes.
like, wow, it made so much sense. Why this
Yeah.
had to come late? And obviously
Yeah.
your life would be so different. And yeah, so I would really just recommend,
Mm-hmm.
keeping your faith strong. That's something that I really value, like that, like our families instilled in us, like in Ethiopia, just really having faith.
Yeah.
And yeah, and just like writing out, list of things that you could be doing. And if you're checking off everything that you could possibly be doing, it's like, okay, like I'm doing my best. These are the things that, I could do, and I'm working on them. And so it's okay. Like just like accepting that there's a limit of what you can do and what you can control. A lot of
Right.
these things, like, being accepted to like a grad program or a job or anything, those are kind of outside of your, control once you've submitted that application, once you've given that
Yeah.
interview. And so just accepting that, okay, I've done what I'm supposed to do on my side. Now
Right.
it's up to whoever's on the other side. And, of course, like things will work out. So faith is important, making sure that you're doing everything you're supposed to, and then just giving, like letting go of control. Very hard, but very important.
Right. 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 Thank you for sharing that, because I think we really struggle with um, not having control over things, or over our future, or over our plan. And when things don't go the way we plan them to go, we kind of feel like, oh my god, it's the end of the world. Like, this is not in the plan. Like, everything has to be according to plan. But
Yes.
sometimes life takes you in different directions. And I think the metaphor is like, you have to like go with the wave, as opposed to like going against it or something. I think there's that kind of metaphor. But I think it's very important for us to really recognize the importance of valuing yourself, and like knowing what we deserve. Sometimes it's very easy to forget that, and you need those constant reminders that what you're doing is great, and where you're at is exactly what you're supposed to do, and where you're supposed to be. So I think reminding ourselves that, and having people around us who are always supportive and positive, and people who tell us that you just need that one person to tell you that whatever you're doing, it's amazing, and I'm really inspired by you. That really makes a difference, because sometimes you get caught up in the routine, or like in your own struggle, or doing yourself, that you might find it difficult to really recognize the accomplishments that you have. I mean, we graduated college, like, for Christ's sake, like, that's something to celebrate. And I was talking to this other person, and we were talking about how we, as international students, we need to get a medal for graduating from college. Like, I'm not even kidding. And I told her, like, we have to start like something to give international students, because we went through so much. And it's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, is because every international student has a different story, and we went through similar but different struggles. But it was a struggle to graduate from college, and in another country, in another environment. And I think we really need to celebrate our accomplishments, and really value our worth, and what we deserve. Yeah, do you agree with that?
Oh my gosh, could not agree more. I'm like, where's my medal?
I know. Where's mine? I was thinking we should definitely start something for real. Like, we deserve that for real.
Yeah. No, I agree for sure. Yeah, it's so important that, yeah, as you said, like to have someone, like people around you that remind you where you started and where you are now, because it's so easy to just think about where you're going next, and you're like, I'm not there yet, I'm not there yet. But the truth is, you've come a long way from where you were, right? Like, you've traveled, like in our case, like 7,000-8,000 miles away from home. Started our life, like basically created your own new home, new identity, forming community from scratch. Like those things are not easy. And like I know that everybody goes through it, but it's like just so much more, as you said, for international students. Because just like our support system is so far away. We're probably speaking, a second language. So there's this like anxiety of, like second anxiety, and just so many more things that make the, accomplishment that much more impressive. So for that reminder, and I love that, you started this podcast as a way to not just like share tips, but as a way to celebrate also your accomplishments and students. So
yeah, thank you so much, Betty. That really means a lot, and I'm very, very proud of you as well, like of everything that you've accomplished. And I see all the things that you're doing, and I couldn't be more proud. And thank you for even coming today to the show. And you have been supporting this podcast since day one. I have to say that you listen to every single episode, so I really, really truly appreciate your support. So as we're ending this conversation, do you have any advice for current international students, for prospective international students who are dealing with their mental well-being?
The first thing that I would say is know that you're not alone. Really, that's such a big relief sometimes to just know that you're not the only person going through it. But at the same time, what you're going through is also unique in its own way. So acknowledge that maybe other people's way of, going on about it is not necessarily, what applies to you. So acknowledge both things, that, that you're not alone, and that you're also unique in your own situation. And so try to find something that, works for yourself, and give yourself grace. I think that's so important. Like, be okay with not being okay sometimes. Like, it's so hard to understand, but like just acknowledging that, these things are real, like mental health, things like depression, anxiety, those are like real health, issues. And acknowledging that, just like you wouldn't judge yourself if you had a stomach ache, right? So don't be so hard on yourself when you are feeling depressed or anything like that. And May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so I just really want to say that, so really, matched with our podcast episode, be okay like seeking help sometimes. I think that's really hard for a lot of people from our kind of cultural backgrounds to seek professional help. My freshman year, a lot of people were talking about counseling, seeing a therapist and things like that, and that seemed so extreme to me at the moment. Like going to see a therapist, like even as a neuroscience major, and I acknowledge that like these things are real, but it's so hard to seek them when it comes to your own health. And it's like, you would go see a doctor if you like had a sore throat or something. So it's okay to seek professional help. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that you're any less. It just means that you're acknowledging that you have something going on and that you need help, and that you want to be better. And so it's okay to seek professional help. So try to find out what kind of counseling service your school provides. There's some online services these days, but sometimes it doesn't have to be like seeking out professional. It could be just seeking the support of your network and your family and friends.
Yeah, those are like some, you sound like even a professional when you're like giving those tips. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, no, seriously, I agree with everything you said. Recognizing your own some of the things that might not be right with you, like recognizing that self-awareness is one of the key things, because you're the only one who's going to know what's going on with you. So recognizing that something is wrong, and then asking for help, discussing it with friends and family, people that you really to share these kinds of feelings with, and seeking professional help. I think that's very underutilized, especially for international students. I remember in our college there were counseling services, but rarely did international students make use of that, and I didn't make use of that, but I found something else that really helped me deal with it. But now I think it might be helpful, but seeking those services, but sometimes those services might only cater to domestic students, and they don't have the cultural understanding or capacity to deal with students who come from different countries. So maybe that also it's something to recognize as well. But as you said, really being open about it. And as you said, like, you go to the doctor if you're having some sort of physical pain, but you kind of disregard your mental pain, or like things that you can't touch or see. And that's it's very, very important for us to recognize that, and really take care of ourselves at the end of the day, because our health is very important, and our mental health is part of our health. So I think it's very important for us to do that. So thank you so much, Preeti, for taking the time, to talk about this very, very relevant and interesting topic with me today. I really appreciate your time. Is there anything you want to add before I end the conversation?
No, this was really a very much needed conversation, and I really appreciate you asking me to come on your podcast.
Yeah, of
I really wish
course.
you all the success, and to everyone listening, just hang in there, take care of yourselves, because we're all that we have at the end of the day.
Exactly. And with that, we end a beautiful conversation of the Internationally podcast. Please make sure to go follow the official Instagram page at Internationally by Ruth, that is LIE, and send an email with your questions and concerns about being an international student to internationallybyruth@gmail.com. Thank you again for tuning in today. I hope you have a lovely week ahead of you, and take care of yourselves, everybody. Bye.